I created this empty repository, and yesterday I started picking at it. I created a change log, and in yesterday's version I just ran some generators that created a space table and an entities table. And what I think a space is a something that has a name and something that can contain a experience. So think of it right now as just a record in a database. And then entities is the association to spaces. So entities will belong to a space. And an entity is some something in that space. Could be a cube, could be a gun, something in there. And then I think we'll have another kind of table that will be called a component. And entities can have multiple components. So a component would be another bag of data like color, position, rotation, something like that. So the entities table doesn't really have anything except an ID and a parent. So I can show you those really quick. We have this migrations folder here. This creates a space which just has an ID, a name, a description, and maybe a slug, which is a unique way of identifying it on a URL, which is somewhat human readable. And then we have entities, which it belongs to a space, and it also can have a parent. So entities is much more like a graph. And this is like, oh, we can have a series of parents. And I'm kind of basing this off of some prior work. So there is this thing called the entity component system, which is popular in game developments, where it's really just a form of mix-in. So entities are just things with IDs. We don't really know what these things are. Maybe we could have a type, which is a kind of enumeration. Like this is a kind of box or a sphere or a cone. So it can have certain primitives, or maybe it's video or some gizmo that contains other behavior. But the behavior isn't really described in here. This is just some sort of nested structure. And I left notes here for maybe in the future we can have a type of table that has the left number and a right number. This is good for being able to query an entire subtree, but we don't have to do this now. And maybe a group ID, which would be useful for grouping all of these entities together under a similar string, under a name, and then doing something like deleting them in bulk or moving them, translating them in bulk, some group kind of operations. So the way I want to do this is let's set an objective for what we want to do in this video today. I'm a little bit tired right now because I got a booster shot for COVID yesterday, so maybe we cut it a little bit less than an hour. But what I wanted to do here is I wanted to write some functions and maybe some tests that says that a scene has a space has these entities, and maybe the top level entity should be a scene. So everything falls underneath the scene, because you might have some things that belong to a space, which, well, first of all, you might have several scenes. Let's say if your game transitions between daylight and nighttime, maybe one scene has a sun in it, one scene has a moon in it. It's just very different, that maybe you can transition from one scene to another that just has different stuff in it. Or maybe you get teleported to another environment, and that environment only exists when you switch scenes. So this is one way of grouping it together. We might have stuff that belongs to a space which is not scene related, like maybe behaviors or some conditional stuff. So this gives us the option of, hey, this is a descriptive way of describing what a space is. So it's very data oriented. And then we can work on a list of entities that can be added to a scene. I would like to have some kind of drop-down picker in the front end that we can click on it and say, oh, so we need to store that list somewhere. So let's try to create these two things.
Can a scene be added to another scene?
Can a scene be added to another scene? You can take the stuff in a scene and copy it to another scene.
But a scene itself it can be added to another scene.
A scene itself can be added to another scene. Probably. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. Because it sounds like scenes are special, or it almost sounds like scenes are like they need a table on its own. If we were doing this kind of tables, because entities, it's very easy for me to sort of picture entities or adding removed, being added and removed from a scene, but I can't really picture seeing being an entity and being added to another scene. That feels pretty weird to me.
So, you can think of it as states. So imagine you just have a set of things that you want to transition from one thing to another. Let's say like different slides. So this gives you ability. Maybe they're just a container for stuff.
Well, yeah. So the containers themselves and the stuff that can be contained in the container, they're not the same things. They shouldn't be in the same table, right?
They're both entities, I think. So if you don't think about the persistence for a while, like it's just something with an ID, so it can be anything.
It, so it's just something. Then why didn't you put space in it too?
A space is in there.
Oh, space is in there. So
Oh,
the
no.
table
Sorry.
space.
Well, space is the like the runtime. Like it will have a URL and it has it does it's kind of like, well, you have to have some container. It's like this is
Right. So
this is the whiteboard, right?
so
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 everything else that you can go in there are stuff in the scene. The
right. So
whiteboard
the
itself is not the scene, right? Not
right.
in the scene.
So the behavior that what I mean is that the way that can I say like the behavior in that table for all the items in that table, they should be pretty similar, right? Like so if scenes cannot be added to a scene, then it doesn't belong there.
Um,
Otherwise, you're just you get some item out of this table, and you have to use an if statement to sort of go, if it's a scene, do you do this kind of things? Otherwise, you do something different.
I suppose, like you're saying, you can't put a scene within a scene. So if you can't put a scene within it, I mean, I guess there's nothing stopping you.
Okay. Okay. Let's just play around with it and see what happens.
Right. I think of them like slides in a. Um, yeah, I see what you're saying. You're thinking of, it has special property. It can't be nested in the same way, so maybe it needs a different table. Maybe. Let's think about that.
Now we'll see. I mean, guess we can. I mean, it's easy to add new things, right? Like we can start coding, and if it doesn't look right, then we'll do something different.
Okay. Yeah. I think, yeah, this kind of goes along with, if we want to make it easy to build spaces, we just allow them stuff that they can find. They can discover it using the drop-down menu or searching, and then they find something and then they can pull it in. So uh, they can maybe pull in these things, but yeah, if we take yeah, I don't know how Blender does it with groups. I suppose you can, but it might be tricky to switch between them. Let's say you can nest them. Sure. I don't know what that would mean for a scene. Maybe you're within a scene and then you switch between some sub scenes. Yeah, maybe. I don't know what that means. Or maybe we just sidestep this issue and let's go with some objects we definitely know. So we know about, let's say, a box. So we can start with that. So let's say there's a box, sphere, cone. We can start with these kind of entities, and then we can address scenes later. I think you might be right about scene being kind of special. So what we have now is when we ran the generator, we created these routes, and right now these routes don't have anything to do with each other. So we have the spaces and we have entities, and there's no relation. So we should probably clean this up a bit in order to be able to create nested entities under a space. And we probably need some kind of where to store the kinds of entities we can have. So if we jump to the front end now, could not compile, restart after changing the following files. What happened here? Oh. Okay. Okay, so we have spaces, and we can create a new space. So maybe we go into the space to edit it. I don't think we need to edit these things. We want to be able to maybe enter the space in order to add entities here. So we'd like to see some kind of drop down in here. Let's see. So we have spaces, which is the space live index, which is this guy here. And in here, it mounts a list of spaces. A list of spaces just calls this function, which queries the database for a bunch of spaces. And we've got show. This takes an ID and it gets a space. Okay, so we might want to have some module that's just holding a list of entities. So maybe we can just throw that into a file somewhere. Maybe in here, entity list. Maybe we can have kinds. And maybe it's a list. And maybe it's like box, cone, sphere. So if we have that, can we do entity kinds? Okay. And what do we want to do? We're in the show container. Okay, so this loads some template, right? Okay, I guess it makes the decisions here. So, okay, that's for the title. Show. I think it loads this thing. So I guess this is used for both edit and show. Oh, here's a modal. Space name, description, slug. What happens if I just create a dropdown here? What's the HTML for a dropdown? Select. Select. Is it options? Is it like this? Is it option? Is that what it looks like? Yeah, okay. And so we want it to say add entities, somehow like that. And then have a button. All right, so how do we get our list of box? So maybe we want a human, more human, I mean, titleized version of that. So instead of this, what if we passed a map? Would that make more sense? Map of name, name is, I'm okay with all lowercase actually. Let's just do this. All right, how do we get this in here? Can we do? So I think these are injected in here. What happens if I just between this? Can I actually reference that entity dot kind? I inspect. Does it have access to this? Grab this module. Okay, what's here? Undefined or private. Did you mean kinds? Okay.
I think they're only option, not options. Yeah, so just take out the options tag.
Sorry, say it again?
Just take out the options tag.
The one with S?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how do I render a list of these? I think we need like a Phoenix form something. Phoenix form option select or something. Form for options, no. Inputs for options for select. Returns options to be used inside a select. Options for select. So value is admin and okay, so this is the value. This is the selected value. And this is the thing. Okay, options for select. How do you use this? Options for select just does that. So is it just this? Options for select and give it this. undefined function options for select.
You need one more parameter. The last one, the second parameter. I guess nil or something.
Oh, look at that. Okay, so we want to add an entity. Pick one of these guys. And when we click on this, we want it to send ourselves a message. So what if we did like Phoenix click? And what do we want that to do? We want it to, I think we want it to submit a form. So if this was in a form, then when we do Phoenix click, we want Phoenix submit testing. What happens here? Alright, we got an error here that's unhandled. Function handle event 3 is undefined or private handle event testing with no parameters here. So we didn't get the value of the form input. So how do we get that? So Phoenix live get form values. Phoenix change. Okay, so on change they're doing something. So here they're getting user params. Okay, so maybe we need both of these. Submit. Accounts, change user, handle event save. Let me look at this again. So when validate is called, we get user params. And this form is for F user accounts, change user, map put action. So they're getting some parameters that are scoped to user. When we did it, what did we get? We didn't get any. We didn't scope it to anything. We just used a regular form. Form 4. Form let F.
Well, this sounds like it's for any single input change. Then you handle whatever event. Or do you want to do that, or do you want to be able to make all the changes and then just click the submit button?
Well, I only have one change in here. So I think what happens is when they change the select, we need the Phoenix change in order to get the change, and then the form submit it says you want to finalize it.
Why do you want to change? Why do you want to handle the change? If there's only one thing, you only need to handle the submit, right?
Right, but it doesn't seem to be sending me the variable, so
I see. Okay.
I think I need to stash it. Because we got nothing here. Unless it's because I didn't give it a name. Maybe it needs a name.
Right. Select doesn't have anything attached to it.
So here, Phoenix submit, testing, name, entity kind. I come over here and I go add, and what do we get here? There we go, entity kind box. Okay, great. So we don't need the on change, which is good. So this is add entity. Here's the entity kind, which is box, and then we want to. So here we have the space ID. We want to add an entity to a space. So we don't have a function that does this right now. So when you use the Phoenix generator, it creates this context for you. And this context creates some functions at the top level. So we have utilities for listing spaces, creating a space. We even have one for creating an entity, but this entity did not require a space ID in here. So maybe we can use this. We just got to pass this space ID in here. So if we if we look at this, it's using the entity change set, which casts these things. It validates that you have to have these things. So what do we say? We just pass the space ID. Okay, so if we use what's here, it would look something like this. We go to the, here's our live view. Okay, first we want to handle this thing so it doesn't break. So let's add this handle event inside, where's this? Space live show. Space live show handler. Handle params, we want to do handle event. It will be add entity, I think. And it will be some kind of entity kind, matching entity kind. And what else? This will be the socket, I think. Let's see if there's an example of this. Handle event, yeah, it needs to return something like this. No reply, assign, back into the socket. This one has space, so we'll just return the space back, and then it will be space with entities. and we need the spaces dot create entity and pass it some adders. The adders can be space ID, which is socket.assigns space ID, and the name of the entity. Oh, we didn't ask for a name. We just said what kind is it. Let's just hard code that for a second. My entity type would be the entity kind. And I think that's all that's required, right? Let's check the migration for entities. This requires, I mean, it doesn't even require, it just says if you provide a space ID, it has to be this, because I didn't make it non-null. Should probably make it non-null. Space. It needs a type, it needs a name, and it will get an auto-generated ID. So I think this is sufficient to create a space entity. Then we want to reload it with entities. So we'll say that space with entities equals get space, but we need something that gives us the entities as well. So if we jump over here, this is what a get space call does. And we want maybe get space with entities, given the ID, do something. So we want to do repo get space with ID, but then we want to get it. Bobby, do you know how to do this? You want to preload the association. What's the command for that?
I'm not sure. It's a Phoenix thing, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, preload.
So here you're getting posts with comments. So this will give you a space, and is it, actually can't you just do this, pipe this to repo.preload that with entities. So this will be this guy again. And we'll have to clean this up later. Okay, so we get passed in this thing, get some adders, we're going to create the entity and reload it, and then assign it back. We probably won't see anything in the front end. Let's What's it down here? So do that. Something failed. Okay, it does not have association entities. Okay. Oh, yes. It doesn't have an entity. So we created this first, and it doesn't know anything about entities. So spaces has to have some, like, has many kind of thing. Entities. And this is, I guess the XR, this thing is just this. Let's try again. Still no. Entities, unique constraint. Oh, okay, we probably added it twice now. So we want to show the entity in here. So back over here, when we originally load it, we're using a get space. Let's use that get space with entities. So now this will contain entities, which means that in our template, we can probably show which entities it has. Maybe we can give a list of entities. Let's see, how do we do this? Unordered list. And then we want to use some kind of for entity in space entities. Does that work? Test. Is that a thing? Variable unused. Okay. So we want to say entity dot name or type, and show them both. Entity name, entity ID even. Okay. So we can't add it twice because it violates the unique constraint, which I put that you have to have a unique name for a space for every entity. We can auto-generate one. I don't know that we have to force people to create a name for the thing they're putting in. What do you guys think? Do we even need a name? I think names are kind of useful but we can kind of use the ID for that, right? What do you think? Do we need a name?
All right, ask, what's the question? We need the ID for the entity, the group ID? Or what? What ID?
Do we need a name when we have an ID?
Oh, oh.
Maybe the name doesn't need to be unique if you have an ID.
Yeah, the name is only useful if you want to reference it.
Maybe you can concatenate type with space IDs with some sort of count or something.
Okay, let's just relax this thing for now. We don't need this per se. And We should have a space though, so let me add null is false to this one. And I will just reset my database. So we'll do ecto mix reset. Mix ecto reset is how that should be. Drop it, rerun the migrations, start our server again. So now when we go to spaces, I'm going to create a new space, test, and we jump in here. I want to add an entity. First will be a box, then we're going to add a cone. Let's add another box and add a sphere. Cool. And that's scope to test, right? So if we create another space, test has 4 entities, but we're going to go in here. This one's just a bunch of boxes. And they persist here. Okay, so we've expressed a space that can have boxes, cones, and if we had a visual element, this is probably, it has some defaults. They're all at the origin, 0, 0, 0, because we haven't specified. They're all probably the same color or no color. And how are we looking at our objectives here? So, all right, have a list of entities that can be added to the scene. We kind of did that with just a list in a module and ability to select these, add it to the scene. So I think we've...
It's added to a space, not a scene.
Sorry, added to a space.
Right?
Added to a space. So yeah, we can create a scene as necessary. I wanted to show you guys this thing. This is the Babylon.js playground. And this thing sets up a scene. So this is more complicated than what we want to expose our users to. Like probably you can drag in new cameras and stuff, but here you're writing code, right? We just want to provide a list of things that they can click and add to the scene and then kind of move them around. They do have this inspector. This shows you the graph of nodes in the scene. So I was thinking it's something kind of like this. So in here we have a sphere. When you click on sphere, it has attributes such as position, rotation, and scaling. So it has the position as 0, 1, 0. So it's kind of lifted up 1 meter. It has no rotation. And the scale is just at 1, 1, 1. And you can actually edit in here, I think. So as live editing, so when you edit this, it's changing the JavaScript. The only thing is nobody else can see this. So we can do this with live view, is that when we change stuff like this, it actually broadcasts a message to any other browser. So it's like collaborative editing. And so one of the concepts of entities is that they can be parented to each other. For example, if you have this as a moon and you want to give it a, or if this is Earth and you want to give it a satellite. So here's sphere. Let me create a cube because a cube is easier to see when it's turning. So I'm going to create a box out here. So if I were to say box equals new babylon.meshbuilder create box. This is my box, and add it to the scene. And here's the box kind of underneath here. I'm gonna lift it up higher so we can see it. So we say box position Y, let's set it at 3 meters. So now it's above here, perfectly aligned on top of, this camera only allows me to rotate, but it's perfectly above this sphere right now. And currently they're independent, so they're both at the top level, so they're not really parented to each other. If I go to the box and I rotate it, for example, actually, an easier way to rotate is just click this rotate button. And so if I rotate, if I rotate this, it's not influencing the sphere at all. So they're just totally independent things. Now, there's two ways to parent the sphere to the cube. One way, if you notice this, the sphere is at 1 meter above the ground. That's because the sphere here is positioned above the ground. Now, if I were to say the sphere's parent is equal to the box, what happens is that it's still lifted 1 meter up, but it's relative to the center of the, it's relative to the cube. So if it wasn't lifted at all, we just wouldn't see the cube at all. It would just be inside of it. So it kind of moved it out. And so if we were to lift it up maybe 3 meters, that sphere is here. And now if we were to rotate the, you see this thing is showing that the sphere is inside the box. And so if we rotate the box, it now, we get this movement for free. So if we rotate this way, we don't see anything. It's actually rotating, but it's hard to see in a sphere. And so this is the kind of thing that I'm kind of planning for in this entities migration. So that's what this parent ID is for, is I figured that we can store this as a nested graph. So we can also do the same thing. If we stored an ID, we would be able to load this data, turn it into JSON, put it into Babylon, loop through it with JavaScript, and rebuild the graph in Babylon.js and be able to express, oh, these things are parented to each other. So if you were to move them, it will have this kind of relationship. And then if we serialize it back into the database, we're kind of taking this graph and iterating through it to save it into a format that's easy for us.
What happens when one entity is both the parent and the child of the other entity? Like you just assign parent ID to each other.
Well, we need to prevent that from happening. That's a good question. Let's see what happens. So if you have a sphere whose parent is the box and you want to assign the box's parent to the sphere, so box parent equals sphere, like that. Yeah, you crash.
That's funny.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. I guess it keeps iterating forever, right? It's trying to, it follows the graph through, so we shouldn't allow that to happen. This is the other way to parent, which I wanted to show you. So right now, this is up here. And I said it was relative to it. So if we make this 1, again, it is 1 relative to the cube. This is known as local coordinate space. So when the sphere was when the sphere was parented to the box, meaning the box is the parent, the 1 here is no longer global coordinate. That's called world space. When you parented it became local space. But if you inspect it, so if you open this inspector here and you say, what is the sphere coordinates, notice that the positions here are expressed in local position. They're not world position because we're actually like 3 or 4 meters above the ground, but here it only says 1, and that's because it's as if you zeroed it out. It's at 0, 1, 0 relative to the box. But what if you had some crazy transformations on it? Let's comment out this box parenting thing for a second. So we're going to run this. This is where it is in world position. So now it's unparented. If you look at the box coordinate, it's still at 0, 1, 0. Sorry, that's the box. If the sphere position is still at 0, 1, 0. This is in world position, and we can apply some rotation to it. So sphere rotation y is, let's say, 0.5 or something like that. Of course, you can't see the rotation, but let's do the box rotation. Box rotation y 1.5. Okay, it's got a little rotation on it. And if I were to put this parent thing back on, it's kind of rotated a little bit. What if when I parent it, I actually want it to stay here? Actually, this is the perfect position for it. So another way to do this is you say sphere.setParent box. And this actually does a different thing. It sets the parent, but it does some calculations for you, keeping its original position. So you see, this is actually in its same spot. It's at 1 and 0.5 rotation. Or actually, I should just move the position so you can see it. Position X, let's say, to, what does that do? So yeah, but if you go and look at it, if you look at the sphere, this is interesting. It's actually, it did some calculation for you. So it's making it seem like it's in world position, but internally, since this is expressed in local coordinate space relative to this, it actually had to move it in a different way. This is useful if you had it set to the right place and you wanted to parent it, but keep it there instead of moving there. So it offset the local positions in order to keep the same position. And this is useful if you already had it set. I want it exactly there for, let's say, rotating like a moon, and it's already there, and I didn't want it to pop over to 0, 0 when I set the parent. So that's an interesting thing. So that'll be interesting to see if we can make a similar kind of calculation if we're having an operation like, oh, here's an entity, and I want to parent it to this other entity. We've got to set the ID, but then we have to set some components. So maybe in the next session, what we could do is we could add what are known in the entity component system as components. And these are like the mix-ins I was talking about, like any bag of data that you want to hook on an entity, like color, rotation, position, that's components. But in the entity, we can still flush out like parenting, grouping. So this is stuff about the graph hierarchy nature of stuff, and this is about extra abilities. And I could see stuff, wildly different kind of components, like maybe something is like a door, so it can contain something like, is this open or closed? Any kind of bag of data that we do. I think we'll create another table for this and associate multiple components to an entity. So that's our session for today. I'd like to end it with any questions or comments. What did you guys think?
It's good. We got to keep going. It'll take some time, I guess.
Where's my window? Here's my window.
Yeah, it's a good start. Starting on the building blocks again.
Yeah, I try to do it in a like UI way first, like sort of try to flush out more of the APIs, because I think the problem with developing games is that you reach a certain point where you just reach for code too fast, and then people develop games in Python, or they develop games in Unity or Unreal, and then those are either C or this, and you can't really move them across platforms easily because there's so much library dependencies. But what if you can express a game that's just as close to declarative as you can? You could say, here's my hierarchy, and here's my behaviors. And maybe these gizmos just have like timers. They have certain primitives that we all kind of know about. Like this is a gun. It subtracts your health by that much. And then the implementers can implement a gun just like how different browser have implemented their own solutions to the HTML spec. We could have a spec that says this is how a very primitive game is written, and then people can say, "Oh, I will write my game to implement this JSON spec in Babylon.js or 3.js or whatever," and then that can be like a simple standard. I mean, it won't be it might not be rich enough for like Unreal and very complicated games, but it might be useful for experiences. Oh, I did this and Sparkles came out or something. All right, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.